I'm going to discuss all the different places you can buy domain names and give you the pros and cons of each, as well as tell you as a beginner where you might want to start out looking to buy your domain names. So first, probably the most popular way of buying a domain name that you can most likely think of and already know of is registering a domain. And this is through a domain name registrar that's oftentimes accompanied by a hosting service. So if you have somebody like GoDaddy, 1&1, Name.com, Register.com, these are all registrars that allow you to register a domain name. So this can be something.com, .net, .org. It can even be a CCTLD, which stands for Country Code TLD, something like .in for India, or a .ca for Canada. But a registrar lets you register a new domain name that has never been registered before. Well, the pros of this are that it's a very low cost to buy a domain name. If you buy a domain through a registrar, most likely your fee is going to be between $5 to $15, depending on the TLD of the name. Now, when I say TLD, if you don't know what that means, TLD is just what follows the dot in a domain name. So if it's a .net, then the TLD is net. If it's a .org, then the TLD is org. It's very easy, and most TLDs cost usually below $15. If you look at a .com, that typically costs about $10 to register. So it's a very low point of entry into domain investing. One of the downsides to registering a domain name is that a lot of people have registered domains, so most of the really good .coms, .net, and .orgs are gone. And in fact, all of the really good .coms are gone. And so a lot of people have been led to believe that, well, since all the good domain names are registered, then there's really not any hope left to get into this market. And nothing could be further from the truth. There are new trends every day, and if you can find a domain that hasn't been registered, that follows a brand new trend, you may find yourself with a very valuable domain name. So that's registering, and that's a very simple, easy way to buy domain names. However, you may be limited into the scope of the potential the domain has based on what names are available when you're trying to register. Another way that you can buy domain names is through domain listing services. These are companies like Sado, Afternic, Snapnames. And how they work is by providing a huge database of domain names available for sale, and then you can buy them just as you would normally buying something off of like a used car website or a new car website, where you get a large listing of inventory and you get a set of prices, or in some cases something that says make offer. And from here you can either make an offer on a domain name, or you can also find domains with given prices and you can pay whatever price the seller is expecting. Now, the pros of a listing service is that it's usually hard to get scammed through a listing service, since you have the service themselves backing the transaction. And at the same time, there are a lot of different metrics that you can see in a listing service that normally you would have to research yourself. Things like traffic, things like revenue, oftentimes will be presented to you in the listing. And that's because the seller has the chance to make a full-scale sales listing that says, here is my domain name and here's what makes it great. And all good domain sellers know that putting this detail into the listing is very important for a buyer so that they can figure out what features make the domain attractive. Now, for new domain investors, I would suggest you stay away from buying domains on domain listing services. We can get into buying domains through these services later, but to start out with, I would stay away from these. In the next lesson, when I discuss selling, that's where we'll come back to listing services and you'll see the true value that they can present to you. Well, we've discussed registering domain names and domain listing services. Another way that you can buy domains is through domain expiry services, or drop catchers. And these are companies like Namejet.com or Pool.com. There's also a great service called FreshDrop that combines a lot of the different domain dropping and domain expiry services together into a single source. But the idea is still the same. When a domain name expires, which means that the owner of the domain did not pay the renewal fee, so that they would have the domain for another year or 2 years, then the domain goes into a deletion process, and domain investors can sit and wait until a domain expires and then pick it up for a lot less money than it would cost were the seller to have sold it to them directly. Now the thing is, if you're looking for expired domain names, just be aware. There's a lot of other domainers that are looking for expired domain names, and if you find a great name, suppose you find the domain buycar.com, and you see that it's going to delete, and you can start bidding on it in 2 days, and the bid price is only $70, well, that might be a $70,000 domain name, and there's a lot of other domain investors that will know about that. So one of the downsides with buying an expired domain name is that you certainly have the potential to find a great domain. Just remember, it's not going to be something that you're going to pay $5, $10, or $15 for. Most likely you're going to be spending more money to buy a good quality expired domain. Now that being said, as you become more comfortable buying domain names, you can start using different expiry services and finding domains that may not be the best of the best, but might be in the mid-range, and on those you can get a great deal on a domain name that may be worth $1, $2, maybe $3,000 that you might be able to pick up for $1, $2, or $300. And that's really where the value in buying expired domain names comes in, especially as a beginning investor. Well, if you're not buying domains by registering or through a listing service or through an expiry service, where else can you buy them? Well, there's a few other places you can buy domains online, and one of those is eBay. Now, the reason that I mention eBay in my course is actually not to suggest that you buy domains from eBay, but actually to dissuade you from buying domains from eBay. eBay is a great marketplace to buy and sell just about anything. However, it's not a great marketplace to buy and sell domain names, and that's because there's a lot of different people on there that are trying to scam new investors who don't know much about domain names. And so what can happen on eBay is you'll buy a domain name from someone, you'll pay them with PayPal, and they'll claim to transfer the domain name to you, and they may never do that. It's very hard to go after these people, especially when it's an amount of $30, $40, maybe $50. In most cases, you lose your money and they can continue propagating the scam. And so for new domain investors and for domainers in general, I suggest that you stay away from eBay. This is not a marketplace made for domainers. If you look at Sato, Afternic, Snapnames, those are marketplaces that offer auction services, and those are made for domainers. Well, the next place that you can buy domain names, and this is another one that I'm trying to keep away from beginners, and that is from private websites. There's a lot of people out there who've taken their own domain portfolios and put them on a private website. Now, the advantage of this is you'll most likely get to deal with the domain owner themselves directly, rather than dealing through a listing service or dealing through an expiry service. The downside is, remember, when you're dealing with the investor themselves, they have a lot of pride and value that they associate with the domain that you might not see. And so a lot of times you'll find in these private websites where someone hosts their own website and sells their domains through that, the prices will be very high. And so that's one thing as a beginner that you'll want to avoid, because you want to make sure that you're getting the best deal that you possibly can. And for starting out, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So you'll want to get a good deal, let yourself make mistakes, and not be out a lot of money once you get further along into the game. Well, there's one more place that you can buy domains online, and that's domaining forums. Things like DN Forum or NamePros. First off, these are great forums for new domainers to get information about domaining and to learn from other domain investors. And it's also a place where you can buy domain names. Well, one of the advantages of buying domains from domain forums is that these are all expert domainers, and they realize that selling through a forum is going to get them the lowest price possible for their domain. So a lot of times they're willing to part with these domains for rock bottom prices, and especially now, there are some great deals to be had. The only thing is, you have to be a little bit more intermediate of a user to really understand the entire negotiation process that you have to do to buy a domain name on a forum. And actually, I'll have a lesson coming up a bit of a ways down the road from now discussing exactly how to negotiate those domain sales on forums, and that's a skill set I think that a lot of domainers could use because there's a lot of great deals out there. But to get started, when you want to really buy your first few domain names, I would really focus on looking at registering a domain name. Maybe you won't get the best domain in the world, but you could find a new hot trend and register a .com, .net, or .org that probably matches that. And looking at things like listing services, where you can buy a domain, you get a listing, you're dealing with a professional organization, and that'll be more familiar to other online buying processes that you have. Well, now you know where to buy a domain, but you don't know what to look for in a domain. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the following lessons. I'll be talking about what to look for in buying a domain name, and really what are the qualities that make a domain valuable. There's a lot of services that offer domain appraisal, but a lot of these are not recognized by domainers. Instead, domainers use their own metrics for why a domain is valuable, and this can really vary from domainer to domainer. In the next lesson, lesson number 3, I'll give you some insight into how domainers value domain values and what you should look for when you're going to buy your first domain name.